So we come to the final video of this collection of videos going through King Lear with reference to the AQA tragedy paper for their English Literature A-level syllabus. And what we see now is the ending of the play, the last 100 or so lines. And of course, positioning is quite easy. But we've now got all these thoughts about how does this stand as a conclusion? What sort of point have we arrived at? We've certainly seen the tragedy unfold, and the tragic trajectory has been on a constant downward spiral for any of the characters that we might have had any regard for. But we've also seen those characters who were cynical and cruel come to their end too, get their comeuppance. So just before the sequence that we're going to look at begins, Goneril and Regan's bodies are brought in, Goneril having poisoned Regan and then committed suicide. So this adds to the body count, which is growing all the time. Edgar mentions that Gloucester died off stage. We think the fool has probably died. He's disappeared, hasn't been seen in the play since Act 3. Earlier, Cornwall and his servant had died. Oswald dies, killed by Edgar. Edmund is dying, but he hasn't quite died as we begin this sequence, etc. So it's a very high body count. In the sequence, then, we'll see Edmund make some attempt to save Lear and Cordelia, does he? He sends somebody, he says quickly send somebody to save them, but then Lear comes in with Cordelia's dead body. He mourns her passing and again seems to be somewhat deranged and delusional. And we see Kent and Edgar and Albany sort of respond to this and not sure really what to do. So let's have a look. We're going to just begin here as the bodies come in of Goneril and Regan. And Edmund's response, "Yet Edmund was beloved," which goes back to the yaws in the ranks of death in Act 4, Scene 2, in that his sign of love is that two people have died because of him. So that's the kind of love that he values, or that's how he sees love. So to the very end, it seems as though this kind of murderous, cynical character of reversed values, really, who stands for everything that most of us don't stand for: selfishness, cruelty, cynicism. It seems to be still there in that response. But then we get this: "I pant for life, some good I mean to do, despite mine own nature. Quickly send, be brief in it, to the castle, for my writ is on the life of Lear and on Cordelia, nay send in time." Now that sounds, and it's usually played on stage as a genuine sort of deathbed conversion towards some kind of virtue, but it's taken me a long time to remember to do that. And as I said, he did seem to respond to the deaths of Goneril and Regan in a very typically sort of bloodthirsty and cruel way. And he'd mentioned quite a while back that, he'd been moved by some of the speeches he'd heard, and he was thinking of doing something good, it seemed, but he doesn't get round to it. And even here he says, "Quickly send, be brief in it," and he doesn't explain himself as quickly as he might do, maybe. It's usually played, as I say, straightforwardly, that he genuinely wants to do some good at the end of his life, which is sort of a redemptive view there. And the whole play's been about doing good for others, but it seems hard to believe in Edmund. I think the problem on stage is it's very hard to play it in a way that doesn't seem real. It's hard to play it as sarcastic or humorous or cynical, even as he's dying there, to be still playing with people. It seems it's just unimaginable, really, how you could perform that and make that become clear that he doesn't mean it. However, as we read it on the page, we might doubt that he means it. Albany, who's rather in charge of things here, run, oh run. But then there's this other element of slowness. It's partly Shakespeare building up the tension and also giving us good reason to believe that the actions have already happened, and it seems realistic that it's going to be too late. Edgar, who thinks of himself as the voice of reason here, is the one who asks the reasonable questions. But to who? Who is it that we're sending after? And what about a token of reprieve? How can we stop them? And so Edmund says, oh yeah, good idea, take my sword and give it to the captain. And again, Albany with the energy and pace. So this final scene does need some sense of tension and drama, although the tension sort of robbed of it, not only because many people watching the play will already know how it ends, it's a famous play, but also because even if you'd never seen it before, you kind of know tragedies don't tend to end very well. And what you've seen in the rest of the play doesn't give you any much hope. Again, he explains, you have commission from my wife and me to hang Cordelia in the prison, to lay the blame upon her own despair that she foredid herself. So he explains himself, and then this great line, this great Shakespearean punch in the face, really, the gods defend her. And then he says, bear him hence a while, so get rid of Edmund, because he's going to die, and we don't really want that to happen on stage. It's a bit awkward and a bit embarrassing, and we'll take the focus away from what we're about to see. But so within 4 words of saying the gods defend her, re-enter King Lear with Cordelia dead in his arms. Now, that seems to be absolutely typical of the metaphysical message that Shakespeare portrays in the play, that whenever people call upon the gods, things do not go well. They do not get what they're looking for. The gods, as Gloucester said, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods seem to be toying with people, or at best just indifferent or non-existent. So now we got this scene with Lear coming in, carrying the dead body of Cordelia, and that is visually the most striking image, isn't it? And tragic in every respect. It's the most tragic image you can imagine, a father carrying his dead daughter. And his response is 4 words of repetition, howl, 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 which of course brings out that metaphor that's been throughout the play of the difference between human beings and animals. And here he kind of is reduced to animal, because there is no human response left anymore. He's got no way of coping with this, I suppose. And as the gap between animals and human beings has been sort of widened often in the play, and then contracted in order to say human beings are behaving like animals in a sort of brutal and unkind way, here the gap between human beings and animals is widened on one level, but then brought right down together again as well. But we're not animals. But kind of we are, essentially. We respond, and animals do also grieve. So he's reduced to that. What he says in the remaining lines is debatably fairly delusional. O you men of stones, had your tongues and eyes, I'd use them, that the heavens' vault should crack. More violent language, more sort of extreme language, more monumental language. She's gone forever. And here, this, I know when one is dead, when one lives, she's dead as earth. Lend me a looking glass, is that her breath will mist her stone, why then she lives. So there's this sort of strange bewilderment. As you might say, he's going through the phases of grief, and this is the first one, is often denial. Oh no, she might not be dead. Let's kind of see if there's breath on a mirror or something like that. Again, is this the promised end line is a good summary of what's happened. The promised end as in the end of the world. This is the promised end of the play too. When we first started watching this play and reading it, we knew it was a tragedy, and this is how tragedies end. But this feels like something monumental, this terrible death of Cordelia and the awful grief of King Lear seems to be like how the world will end. So Edgar sort of corrects him in his rather sort of studious and punctilious way. We can't it isn't the end of the world, but it's the image of that horror. It's the picture of how it might be at the end of the world. And all Albany can say is 3 words, fall and cease. Just give up, fall down. Everybody collapse, everybody just end. They are like the audience watching this thinking, this is appalling, this is terrible. And Lear continues with this kind of fussing over Cordelia's body, hoping that she might not be dead. The feather stirs, she lives. If it be so, it is a chance that she does redeem all sorrows that I have ever felt. there's never really a production, I think, that plays us to believe that there is any life in Cordelia or that there is any hope there. We see it clearly as a sort of raving, grief-stricken, delusional Lear here. Kent kneeling, it says, as a possible stage direction, typical of Kent. He remains loyal. What is also sort of moving at the end is that loyalty of Kent, just trying to say, well, come on. Good master, come on. Let's just, move you away from the body, maybe. Let's try to move this forward a little bit. And Lear, in his final sort of anger, prithee away, "'Tis noble Kent, your friend," Edgar tries to explain. Again, Edgar rather kind of blandly realistic and factual and... Well, it's Kent. Why would you send him away? Of course, he did ironically send him away right at the beginning of the play, and here he still wants to send him away. And then we get this a little bit more raving, "A plague upon you, murderers, traitors all." So again, angry, bitter language that's been there throughout the play. I might have saved her, now she's gone forever. So sort of delusion that somehow they've interfered just at the moment he was going to save her. That's never taken as a true fact, but merely as his raving. Cordelia, stay a little, What sayest thou? Her voice was ever soft, gentle and low, an excellent thing in a woman. I killed the slave that was a hanging. So the emotion here has to be very tender, very extreme, very powerful, very, lots going on here on stage. We need to capture this moment. We need to feel great sympathy for Lear and great sorrow at the passing of Cordelia. And yes, he did kill the man who tried to hang him. As well as her. "Did I not, fellow, I have seen the day. With my good biting falchion, I would have made them skip." So he could fight, he's saying there. There was a time when I was a fighter. I'm old now, and these same crosses spoil me. Who are you? Mine eyes are not the best, I'll tell you straight. So this kind of bewilderment, reflecting perhaps Gloucester's state throughout most of the second half of the play, just not sure what's going on, but also makes us think of Act 4, Scene 7, where he was reconciling with Cordelia and he was bewildered. I don't know where I am and what's going on. Kent says, "If fortune brag of two she loved and hated, one of them we behold." Sort of like almost a riddle, almost like the fool come back at the end there, but like a sort of joke maybe that Kent might have shared with Lear back in the old days. But it's not really appropriate here. It's a funny choice of Kent's. But perhaps again, kind of copying the fool, just trying to jolly him out a little bit of his bewilderment. This is a dull sight, you're not Kent. And that's a sort of positive. Yes, the same, says Kent, and he's really kind of... But it's the two-word and then a pause, so that's just two-word line there. So that might be he's emotional. He's like, yes, it is me. You recognise me. Your servant. Where's your servant Caius? So Caius presumably is a name. It's not really mentioned in the play that was associated with the disguised Kent. And so Lear says, he's a good fellow, I can tell you that. He'll strike quickly in two. He's dead and rotten. So Lear assumes that the man who Kent pretended to be, who had followed him through the latter half of the play, is dead. And Kent tries to explain, "No, my good lord, I am that very man. I'll see that straight." Meaning, I don't know what you mean. It's too much for him to take in. But that word "see" again cropping up at that point, at this point, at the end of the play, this kind of sense of still trying to see things right and not really being able to. The whole play has shown blindness, confusion, lack of ability to see what's real. Kent tries to continue with his rather realistic depiction of things. I followed you all this time, and Lear says as sort of non sequitur, "You're welcome." Here, "Oh well, you're welcome," but he's like saying, "No, I've been with you all the time." And then Kent sort of says, "All's cheerless, dark and deadly. Your eldest daughters have verdone themselves, are desperately dead." So I think, says Lear, but we get the impression that he's like a slightly sort of demented old man there who's just saying anything. He doesn't really know what they're saying or what they mean, and Albany points that out. He knows not what he says, and vain it is that we present us to him. Very bootless. So both Edgar and Albany seem to be realistic at this point. As we come staggering towards the conclusion, we hear that Edmund is dead, and Albany's very dismissive of that. That's a trifle. And he tries for a moment to say, I'll resign my reign, my leadership, and Lear can be king again. Which is a ridiculous thing to say at this point, as Lear is a broken man. And therefore the ridiculousness of that idea also undercuts his attempt at a sort of happy ending almost. All friends shall taste the wages of their virtues, all foes the cups of their deserving. So it's like he thinks, oh, well, now we can sort everything out and everyone's going to get what they deserve. Well, that's not going to happen. No one's getting exactly what they deserve, and most people are dead, basically, that we've followed in the play. And as he's saying that, then he looks at Lear and says, oh, see. So again, he might be saying that to himself as well, though. Look at what's happening around you and realise the world is not going to turn into a happy ending here. That is not where we're heading. And then we get Lear's final speech. Alas, my poor fool is hanged. Now, some people think that refers directly to the real fool who was hanged, but obviously Cordelia was hanged, so it might be that he's calling her my poor fool, my poor kid, my poor little darling. And it might also be Shakespeare's playfulness of saying, well, the two are kind of in some ways the same person. The two people who spoke truth to Lear, they may have been played by the same performer in the original productions. And then we get this animal imagery again. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life and thou no breath at all? So, that idea of why should these lower creatures be allowed to live? Why should anyone be allowed to live but his most beloved person not? And then that, how can you say everything by just repeating never, 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 never? And it's a great test of the actor's facility to say that, where it just doesn't sound like saying never, 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 never. It's got to, each time you say it's got to have a slightly different awareness and a sort of open-eyed kind of, oh, well, never. I'm never going to see her again. It's that horror of grief of thinking, that's it. I will never see that person ever again. I can't quite believe it. And then he says, undo my button. Look on her lips. Look there. So he's kind of, it seems, delusionally thinking, oh, well, she might be breathing. But it's also, is that Shakespeare saying, look at this. This is the symbol of our life, our world, our culture, how we live now in 1606 or whenever he wrote the play. A dead young woman who's done no wrong and has been nothing but faithful and good, but she's died horrifically and young for no reason, this pointless waste of life. That is how life has been always throughout history, throughout Western history. Edgar says he faints. Kent says, oh, break heart, I prithee break. So he's just totally broken and doesn't know what to do. Edgar again, like he did with Gloucester, saying, look up, my lord, come on, just, look up to the sky, cheer up, be positive. And Kent's like, don't vex his ghost, let him pass. He hates him much that would, upon the rack of this tough world, stretch him out longer. The world is a rack, a torture implement, in which you're stretched out upon it until you break. That is what life is, this extended torture. It's a horrific image of, real despair about what life might be. Edgar says he's gone indeed. The wonder is he's endured so long. Says Ken, I can't believe he's managed to survive this long. And then you get this attempt at a sort of ordered conclusion from Albany or Edgar, because in some versions of the play, Edgar has the final lines. And the one we're looking at here, it's Albany. It kind of shows the two are slightly interchangeable here at this point anyway. And that both kind of feel that they are capable of restoring order and that they can see justice in what's happened. Whereas many of us would see just what Lear seemed to be pointing out to us, look at this dead young girl and just see that as the image of what we've watched throughout these, not be 3 hours of quite aggressive and terrible stuff. So Albany gives out a few orders, but Kent says, "I've got a journey I must go. My master calls me." So it sounds like he's going to end his own life. And then we get the final lines. "The weight of this sad time we must obey." So we have to understand this sadness, understand the horror of what we've experienced, the misery of it. "Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say," seems to go right back to Cordelia in the first scene, that she would not say what she ought to say. She would only say what she really felt, and that's the right way to be. But it hasn't really done much good for her in this play. "The oldest have borne most. What we that are young shall never see so much nor live so long." So there's a kind of humility there of the younger people who throughout much of the play were trying to usurp the old and dismiss them and ridicule them. But here Albany's respectful of the old and thinks that the young are not up to their value, really, that they're not as good as the old. So there's still these reversals and opposites and upside downs in the play at this stage. And where have we got to? We've got to the fact that there's only really two characters left standing, which is Edgar and Albany. And that both of those characters were weak and gullible for parts of the play, and then perhaps overconfident in their sense of their own righteousness in other parts of the play. And so the true tragedy is that nothing of good has come of all this. Nothing has been revealed except that life is this terrible, terrible torment that we have to endure. And that really, if anything at all can be wrestled from this kind of torment of violent action and violent language that we've lived through, is just show some compassion, show some sympathy, think of others a little bit. That might be the only thing that can somehow rescue humanity.